If there ever is a Mount Rushmore of off-road vehicles, on the list, it's gotta be the Jeep Wrangler. The Wrangler was built for the off-road. Yeah, you can drive it on the streets, but what this American four-wheeler wants most is to taste the dirt. You wanna go trail riding? Oh yeah, it does that. You wanna crawl up some rocks? Oh, of course it does that. You wanna do a little mud bogging? You bet your muddy buns the Wrangler can do it. The Wrangler was designed and engineered to beat the Germans in World War II. It's got Adolf whoopin DNA under the hood. But what makes it so good? Well, today we're gonna look at some of the engineering that goes into one of the most popular and most capable off-roaders ever built. We're gonna be talking about coilovers. We're gonna be talking about suspension geometry. We're talking heavy duty Dana 44 axles. If you know, you know. Wrangle up some breakfast or a late night snack, depending on where you're at and what time it is. Let's get some B2B going. I want to thank Omaze for partnering with us to bring you this episode of Bumper to Bumper. If you don't know already, Omaze is this really cool company that supports amazing causes by offering you the chance to win experiences you could only dream of. We're talking trips to tropical islands, hanging out with celebrities, getting backstage access at your favorite concerts, and of course, Omaze also offers you the chance to win super sick cars. Dream cars like the 2020 Corvette Stingray Z51, the Porsche 911 Cabriolet, and the Ferrari GTC4 Lusso. And even more than that, you can go check out all the cars at omaze.com/cars. And while you're there, enter for a chance to win one of them. Thanks, Omaze, and thank you for supporting the companies that support Donut. We love you. Now, in my opinion, the TJ is peak Wrangler. It's the favorite child of the family. It brought back the famous round headlights that were on the CJ. It was the last Wrangler to use AMC parts, and it was the first Jeep to feature the oh-so-popular Rubicon package. Now, the goal of the engineers on the TJ program was to make the Wrangler more comfortable and usable on a daily basis, while also building up its off-road capabilities at the same time. And one of the ways they did that was in the suspension department. They went from leaf springs to coil springs. Coil me, baby, like a snake. If you take a gander under the majority of trucks out there on the road, you'll see that they're fitted with leaf springs. And leaf springs, man, them things have been around since the medieval times when they were called carriage springs. A little horse and pony and a little carriage. Now, these springs are made up of arc-shaped pieces of steel that are stacked up on top of each other and then sandwiched together. And the two ends of the leaves are then attached to the frame of the truck, and the center is where the leaf attaches to the axle. They can either be on top of the axle in what's called spring over axle, or below, which is called spring under axle. And regardless of where the leaf is located relative to the axle, it's the leaf that provides the support and the weight of the vehicle and any other weight added to it. It's also used to locate the axle and control the height of the truck or the SUV. Now, the upside of leaf springs is that they can take a large amount of vertical load being pushed down on them, which is why heavy-duty trucks still use them to this day. And this vertical load is also distributed through the entire length of the spring. Now, if a leaf breaks, for example, you still have enough support in the other leaves that you can actually make it back home. They're also simpler in design. At the end of the day, it's just steel strips bolted to the axle and the chassis. But one of the main disadvantages of leaf spring setups is that they ride rough. I mean, the springs can carry heavy loads, but when they're not loaded, they bounce around like, I don't know, let me think. Bounce around like, I don't know, my eyebrows apparently. Now, did you know that eyebrows keep moisture away from your eyeballs so that your vision stays clear? Okay, and they're also essential in nonverbal communication. Anyways, you also can't tune leaf springs. Now, you can add leads and you can take away leads, but that's pretty much it. And maybe most importantly, in the off-road game, they also don't offer as much flexibility and movement. Now, in nasty terrain, a leaf spring suspension doesn't have the flexibility to keep the wheels in contact with the ground as easy as, I don't know, a coil system would. So in 1997, when the Jeep team released their new TJ Wrangler, they ditched the leaf spring setup from the previous model and used coil springs on all four corners. They called it the Quadra Coil 4-link system. Now, Quadra Coil means 4 coils, we got that, and 4 links relates to how the frame connects to the axles. And we're gonna get to that in a second, but first, let's figure out why the TJ updated its suspension with coil springs. Now, instead of having long, heavy plates of steel to act as your spring, the steel is coiled. And there's some obvious benefits to this, one being weight. You use less material to make the spring, so your suspension setup is lighter. But the Wrangler engineers, they weren't after necessarily weight savings as much as they were interested in better ride quality on the pavement and better off-road capabilities on the trail. Now let's imagine a coil spring is just a really stiff slinky. But even if they're stiff, they're still more flexible than leaf springs. And this greater flexibility allows more movement in the suspension system. Now coil springs' ability to flex and bend help it absorb potholes and terribly paved bumpy roads compared to its leaf counterpart. But if you bought a Wrangler, chances are you bought it to take it off-road. So what are the off-road benefits? Well, you get a lot more articulation with the coil spring. If you look at images of Jeeps crawling up rock faces, they look more like some Cirque du Soleil performer than they do a friggin' SUV. It's wild. Leaf springs stick out in the front and the rear of the vehicle, and they inhibit the approach and depart angle. That's approach, going up a rock, depart, going down a rock. Now with coil spring setups, you avoid that. With the switch from leaf to coils, the Wrangler got 7 more inches of wheel travel. That's the distance the wheel can move vertically without bottoming out, either at the top or the bottom of its stroke. Now we talked about not being able to tune your suspension with leaf springs moments ago. Well, with coil springs, you can choose your spring application to match the terrain that you're driving over. Let's go on a little field trip. Okay, hop in the old Jerry bus and let's take a short trip. We don't gotta go far. We're gonna go right over there to the back of my garage. Welcome to the back portion of my garage, and behind me I have a bunch of different types of springs. And the first spring I want to talk about is what's called a linear spring. And I know it's a linear spring because if I look at the spacing in between the coils, they're all the same. That tells you that the rate of compression is the same throughout the entire length of the spring. Now this is a 5.4 kilogram per millimeter spring. That is the spring rate. And that tells you in a linear spring that that compressive force, that spring rate, is the exact same throughout the entire stroke or length of the spring as it's going through its travel. Now, this spring isn't the only type of spring. There's also what's called a progressive spring, and a progressive spring gets progressively stiffer as you compress it. And if you look at the spacing in between the coils on the top portion of the spring versus the bottom portion, they're different. And that's because when you go to compress it, the top portion soaks up that initial force, and then as you get stronger into there or you apply more force, the bottom spring rate comes into play. Now, that's not the only type of spring. There's also what's called a dual rate spring. And right here I have a linear spring and I have another linear spring. This has one spring rate, this has a different spring rate. Well, when they go to manufacture a dual rate spring, they take 2 springs like this with different rates and they combine them into one continuous coil. That's called a dual rate. And also, I actually lied a little bit. This is not actually a progressive spring. This is a cup holder and you put pins in it. And Felipe gave it to me to use this as an example, and he wants me to give it back to him, but I'm probably not going to because I like it. So those are all pretty solid reasons to switch to coil springs. But one reason the engineers designed the TJ to use coil springs was that the previous generation Wrangler, they had this problem, and it was called axle wrap. Now say you have an engine that's got a lot of torque. Well, when you go to step on the gas, that torque is transferred from the engine to the drive shaft, to the axles, to the wheels. And in a leaf spring setup, this causes the leaf to twist and bend into an S shape. And the result of this is a loss of traction. All that torque that could have been transferred to the wheels is now being taken up by the twisting of the leaf spring. Not only that, it also causes the pinion angle to change. Now that's the angle of the differential's pinion in relation to the drive shaft. And you don't want your pinion angle changing under load. It creates a ton of driveline vibration in the best of scenarios. And in the worst of scenarios, you can break stuff. Not good, no thank you. Now the TJ and its Quadra Coil suspension setup, it helped improve the ride quality, gave off-roaders the ability to tune their suspension, and it eliminated axle wrap. Bing, bang, boom, jeepers creepers, where'd you get those peepers? Now, when we talk about suspension, there are three parts to focus on. There's the weight support, that's your springs. There's the dampening, that's your shocks. And then there's your axle location, that's your links, also called control arms. So not only did the TJ use Quadra Coil, it used what's called a 4-link setup. Now, a 4-link setup means that your axles are supported by 4 links. 2 upper arms connected to the top of the axle and 2 lower arms connected to the bottom of the axle, with the other ends of the control arms connected to the frame. Now, in general, when you hear the word link, that's anything that helps hold the axle in a certain place. But when we say 4-link, we're specifically talking about control arms. And you need these control arms to locate the axle, meaning you want to keep the axle in a defined area. The main function of the Wrangler's control arm is to control the up and down movement of the suspension. They support the vertical motion of the axles while also keeping the axle center from moving front to back. Well, why would you want your axles to not move from front to back? Well, you don't want it moving around in that direction really at all. That's how you end up breaking stuff. Remember, we just talked about axle wrap. That's a product of having an axle being able to shift forward and back. And there's another unwanted side effect of not having links to support your axle, and it's this nasty little phenomena called bump steer. Bump steer is when you hit a bump on the trail or a road or wherever, and it causes your car to want to change direction. That bump causes your springs to compress, which then causes some unwanted articulation of your suspension that ends up changing the steering angle of the wheels. Your wheels are pointing in a direction you didn't tell them to go. So, what did the Wrangler engineers do? Well, they used a 4-link suspension setup with control bars to control the fore and aft movement. Fore and aft, that's just forward and back, just a fancy way of saying it. But if you're sitting there thinking, hey Jerry, what about the side-to-side movement? Well, they used what's called a panhard bar or track bar mounted parallel to the axle, and that keeps it centered from side to side. So by adding control arms, they improve the TJ's directional stability, its ability to put torque on the ground, which improves traction, and it also prevents bump steer, a common occurrence in older Jeeps. Guys, you are now all masters in 4-link suspension. You're officially certified B2B engineers. We should make a sticker like that. You guys want a B2B engineering sticker? Drop a comment down below. Let me know if that's something you want. I'll certify each sticker that goes out to you, and it is going to be a lot cheaper than actually going to college. Also, quick side note, the engineers designed the Wrangler so that the suspension geometry prevented bump steer from occurring. But in true Wrangler boy and Wrangler girl fashion, when you start modifying your Jeep, throwing lift kits on there and changing your control arm lengths, your suspension geometry is now not the same, and you get into more dangerous areas of the Wrangler, such as death wobble. You wanna know what death wobble is? Look at this. It's definitely terrifying. Now, part of what makes the Jeep Wrangler so good, from the open trail to the technical rock climbs, are its solid axles. There are 2 types of axles. There's solid, also called straight axles, and then you got your independent rear suspension or independent front suspension. Now, I'll let you guys debate in the comments which is better, but we're gonna talk about solid axles. And the Wrangler, to this day, still uses solid axles. No fancy independent suspension. Oh, but why, Jerry? Well, because if Jeep did that, the Wrangler crew would burn Chrysler down to the ground. They love their straight axle, and here is why. Now, straight axles are simple and they're strong, and it's just a system of gears and axles contained within a metal housing which transmits power to the wheels. And the Wrangler uses solid axles on both the front and the rear. Now, compared to independent front suspension or rear suspension, these axles have less moving pieces, which makes them easier to work on or even swap out if you end up damaging them. You don't have CV joints to deal with. If you ever need to get inside the differential, the cover is right there. It's not buried in between the frame rails. And the housing, it's made of cast steel. So yeah, they weigh a ton, but they're heavy duty, which adds to protecting the gears and axles inside that housing. And from a performance standpoint, solid axles can put more torque to the wheels since there are fewer parts that the power has to transfer through. So when the TJ was released, Jeep equipped its Wrangler with some of the toughest axles ever made, Dana axles. Now, Dana has been making axles since the early 1900s, and almost every big name manufacturer at some point has stuffed some Danas under their rigs. And the TJs got Dana 30s, 35s, and the very popular 44s in the Rubicon. And those numbers simply identify the different axles. In general, for Dana axles, the larger the ID number, the bigger the axle housing, axle shafts, and the ring and pinion diameter. The only thing cooler than having Dana 44s on your Wrangler, I don't even know, should I show them? Should I show them? All right. You put some freaking sweet donut stickers on it. The great thing about the Wrangler is that through its 33-year run, they share a lot of the same stuff. Now, we've had 4 generations of the Jeep recipe, and that recipe has barely changed. See, actually, did I say Jeep? See? I did. See what I did there? I said Jeep. I know, but I meant Wrangler. And that actually leads me to my next point. It's such the brand's identity. Jeep would be nothing without the Wrangler. It's really important. And if you want to know more about that story, you should actually watch this episode of Up to Speed. It's a really good one. Like and subscribe. Follow me on Instagram at Jeremiah Burton. Follow us on Donut at Donut Media. Bye for now.